In the summer of 2003, a 50-year-old man named Inger Perkins was camping with his son in the backcountry of Liard River Hot Springs Provincial Park in northern British Columbia when a black bear emerged from the brush at the edge of their campsite and attacked him without provocation, without warning, and without any of the behavioral signals that wildlife guides describe when they explain how to recognize a defensive bear. There was no bluff charge. There was no popping of the jaws. If what you just heard makes you want to keep going, stay here. This is exactly the kind of content we make, and there is a lot more of it. Subscribe now so you do not miss what comes next. There was no huffing, no swatting at the ground, no assertion of space around a food source or cubs. The bear simply came out of the vegetation and attacked a human being with the focused, sustained intent that wildlife biologists and attack investigators would later classify as predatory. Perkins fought back. He was killed. His son, Brent, was attacked immediately after and survived only by playing dead and remaining motionless while the bear stood over him. Wildlife officers responding to the scene found that the bear had partially consumed Inger Perkins. It was shot at the site. The attack at Liard River was not unique. It was not an aberration so extreme that it required a complete revision of established thinking about black bears. It was, however, part of a pattern that has been accumulating in the scientific literature and the incident databases for decades, and that the public understanding of black bears has consistently failed to absorb. The pattern is this. When black bears kill people, they are almost always doing something that grizzly bears, despite their fearsome reputation, almost never do. They are hunting. And the data that emerges from fatal black bear attack investigations, when examined systematically and honestly, reveals something about black bears that contradicts the comfortable narrative that has governed public communication about this species since the species first began coexisting with large numbers of humans in developed North American landscapes. The conventional wisdom about bear attacks in North America runs something like this. Grizzly bears are the dangerous ones. They are large, they are powerful, they have attitudes that do not accommodate human proximity, and they will maul a person over a perceived threat to their space, their cubs, or their food. Black bears are the smaller, more timid, more ecologically flexible cousins that have learned to coexist with humans across a vast continental range, that raid bird feeders and garbage cans, that occasionally cause property damage and generate wildlife complaint calls, but that very rarely actually hurt anyone and almost never kill anyone. This narrative is comforting. It is useful for wildlife agencies trying to manage public attitudes toward bear coexistence programs. And it is, in a specific and important way, that this conventional wisdom has never fully reckoned with, dangerously incomplete. If you find the gap between what you think you know and what the data actually shows as fascinating as I do, stay with this video all the way through. What we are going to work through together in the next several minutes fundamentally changes the way you think about large predators and the risk they represent to humans. If you want more content that takes predator ecology seriously and refuses to settle for the reassuring version of a complicated story, subscribe now. It matters for what we are building here, and it costs you nothing. The place to begin is with the raw mortality numbers, because the raw numbers are where the conventional wisdom first starts to come apart. Since the year 1900, black bears have killed approximately 63 people in North America. Grizzly bears, sometimes called brown bears in the Alaskan portions of their range, have killed approximately 63 to 70 people in North America in the same period. Those numbers are inexact because the historical record is incomplete in places, and because some incidents involve disputed species identification. But they are the best available figures from the most comprehensive analyses conducted by researchers like Stephen Herrero, whose landmark 2011 study in the Journal of Wildlife Management remains the foundational scientific document on fatal bear attacks in North America. Look at those numbers for a moment. A species that occupies a range roughly 4 times as large as the grizzly's current range in North America, with a population estimated at 300,000 to 800,000 animals compared to the grizzly's 55,000 or so in the same geographic region, has killed approximately the same number of people. The black bear is dramatically more numerous, dramatically more widely distributed, and shares habitat with a dramatically larger number of humans than the grizzly does. If you normalize the fatality numbers for population size and geographic overlap with humans, black bears are killing people at a rate that makes the grizzly bear's reputation look partly like a product of fear rather than a fair reading of the statistical record. But the numbers alone, as striking as they are when you look at them this way, are not where the most important information lives. The most important information lives in the character of the fatal attacks. When researchers examine the circumstances of fatal bear attacks, they sort them into 2 broad categories that represent fundamentally different behavioral events. Defensive attacks are attacks in which the bear is responding to a perceived threat. The human has surprised the bear at close range. The bear has been surprised in proximity to cubs. The bear is on a food source, a carcass, a berry patch, a cached kill, and a human has come too close. The bear's attack in these cases is not predatory. It is a defensive use of force to neutralize a perceived threat, and once the threat is neutralized, either because the human has retreated or submitted or lost consciousness and is perceived as no longer threatening, the attack often stops. Defensive attacks are the signature attack type of the grizzly bear. The majority of non-fatal grizzly bear maulings in North America are defensive in character, triggered by surprise encounters in dense vegetation, by mother bears with cubs, or by bears on food sources. The play-dead recommendation for grizzly bear attacks in these contexts is grounded in this behavioral reality. An animal conducting a defensive attack is trying to stop a threat, not consume prey. Appearing non-threatening by lying face down, protecting the back of the head, and remaining still has a documented record of causing defensive mode grizzly bears to disengage and leave. Predatory attacks are something else entirely. A predatory attack is what happens when a bear identifies a human as a potential food source and initiates behavior directed at killing and consuming that human. The behavioral signatures are different. There is typically no bluff charging, no warning behavior, no defensive posturing. The animal moves with focused intent. It may stalk before attacking. It may show unusual boldness in approaching humans in daylight, in entering occupied camps, in following humans along trails. When the attack begins, it does not stop when the victim becomes submissive or plays dead. Playing dead against a predatory bear attack is not a survival strategy. It is a way of making yourself easier to eat. The behavioral guidance for predatory bear attacks is diametrically opposite to the guidance for defensive attacks. You fight back. You fight with maximum aggression and any available tool. You target sensitive areas. You do not stop fighting until the bear disengages, because the bear is not going to disengage on its own. It has initiated a predatory sequence that is not terminated by the submission of the prey. The critical finding of Stephen Herrero's 2011 analysis and the subsequent work that has built on it is this: predatory attacks are the dominant modality of fatal black bear attacks on humans in North America. In Herrero's analysis, 88% of fatal black bear attacks were predatory in nature. The bear was not defending cubs. The bear was not defending a food cache. The bear was not surprised at close range. The bear had identified a human as prey and was killing that human for food. That 88% figure is the number that the conventional wisdom about black bears has never successfully integrated, because it is fundamentally incompatible with the cultural image of the black bear as a cautious, subordinate, essentially timid, large mammal that occasionally gets into trouble around campsites and dumpsters. By contrast, the majority of non-fatal grizzly attacks are defensive. Fatal grizzly attacks have a more mixed profile, but the predatory component is substantially lower than it is for black bears. The animal that grizzly bears actually are in the fatal attack data is a powerful, reactive, territorial predator that uses overwhelming force to neutralize perceived threats and occasionally kills humans in that process, but is not typically hunting them. The animal that black bears actually are in the fatal attack data, not the non-fatal encounters, not the garbage raids, but the fatal attack data, is something more troubling. It is an animal that, when it decides to kill a human, has almost always decided to kill a human for food. The ecological and evolutionary reasons for this difference are important and underappreciated, because they explain why black bears in a predatory mode behave so differently from the cultural image of the species, and why that gap between the image and the behavioral reality is dangerous for people who encounter a black bear in that mode without any framework for understanding what they are actually facing. Grizzly bears evolved in open environments, the tundra and grassland landscapes of the Pleistocene, alongside megafauna competitors, and prey that included enormous herbivores and other large carnivores. They developed large size, great physical power, and an aggressive, assertive behavioral repertoire that served them in an ecological context where competing with other large animals over resources was a daily reality. Their aggression is a product of that evolutionary history. They are animals that evolved to fight and that use threat display and physical force as standard social currency. Their interactions with humans, in many cases, take the form of aggressive threat responses, because aggression is how grizzlies resolve ambiguous or threatening situations generally. The grizzly's aggression is, in an ecological sense, honest. It is expressing itself clearly, and it is responding to social cues in a way that, once understood, is at least somewhat predictable. Black bears evolved in forested environments alongside different competitive pressures and developed a different behavioral strategy for managing conflict with animals larger than themselves. That strategy is avoidance. Black bears climb trees. They retreat from confrontations they cannot win. They are subordinate to grizzly bears where the two species overlap, and their behavioral repertoire reflects millions of years of selection pressure that favored deference to larger, more aggressive competitors. This avoidance tendency is the foundation of the cultural image of the black bear as timid, and it is real. Most black bears, in most situations, will go to considerable lengths to avoid a confrontation with a human. The species has coexisted with expanding human populations across an enormous range, absorbing habitat loss and pressure that would have driven a less behaviorally flexible species to functional extinction, partly through this remarkable capacity for avoidance and tolerance. But avoidance has a threshold, and in a predatory black bear, the relevant threshold is not about threat assessment, it is about prey assessment. A black bear that has shifted into predatory mode toward a human being is not an animal that is conflicted about the encounter or that is weighing the risks of an attack against the costs of retreat. It has made a decision, not in any conscious sense, but in the behavioral sense that matters for survival, that the human in front of it is a food source worth pursuing. At that point, the avoidance behavioral repertoire is not engaged. The animal that will back down from a confrontation with a larger mammal in a social context is not the animal you are dealing with when you are facing a predatory black bear. You are dealing with a predator that is substantially more committed to the outcome of this encounter than any threat display from a defensive grizzly would suggest. The size differential between black bears and grizzlies, which is one of the primary reasons people assume grizzlies are more dangerous, is also less meaningful in the context of predatory attacks than it seems. An adult male black bear weighing 250 to 400 pounds is not a small or weak animal. It is fully capable of killing an adult human being quickly and efficiently. The black bear is pound for pound a capable predator whose hunting performance on deer, moose calves, and other ungulates is well documented. A black bear that has committed to a predatory attack on a human is applying the same physical toolkit it uses on prey animals that are substantially larger than it is, in some cases. And it is applying that toolkit with the focused, sustained intent that predatory attacks involve. The fact that a grizzly bear in a defensive attack is larger and more powerful is irrelevant if you fight back effectively and the grizzly disengages, which defensive grizzlies often do. The fact that a black bear in a predatory attack is somewhat smaller is irrelevant if it does not disengage and you have no framework for fighting back because you thought black bears were timid. The profile of predatory black bear attackers that emerges from the fatal attack data reveals several consistent features that are important for understanding when and where the risk is highest. Male bears are involved in the vast majority of predatory attacks. Adult males are the most common demographic, though young adult males, dispersing from their natal ranges, are also disproportionately represented. Bears in nutritional stress are significantly overrepresented. Bears that have been observed behaving boldly around humans in the period before a fatal attack, approaching campsites, following people, showing reduced flight distance from human presence, appear in the histories of multiple fatal incidents. These are not random events generated by a stable, low baseline of predatory behavior. They are events produced by specific bears in specific conditions that are, at least partially, identifiable before the fatal attack occurs. The nutritional stress dimension is particularly important because it is one of the mechanisms through which human-bear conflict ecology connects to a broader landscape of conservation and management decisions. Black bears in nutritional stress, which can occur due to mast crop failure, drought reducing berry production, prey population declines, or territorial competition between males that limits a bear's access to its optimal foraging range, are bears whose cost-benefit calculation around attacking large prey has shifted. The energetic cost of attacking and killing a large prey animal is always significant. Under adequate nutritional conditions, a black bear can meet its caloric requirements through lower-risk foraging on berries, insects, vegetation, and small prey. When those options are inadequate, the calculation shifts. Large prey becomes worth the risk, and humans, from the perspective of a nutritionally stressed black bear that has lost its flight response to human presence, can register as large prey. The hyperphagia period, in late summer and fall, is the most dangerous time of year for predatory black bear attacks, and this is not a coincidence. During hyperphagia, bears are consuming anywhere from 15,000 to 20,000 calories per day in preparation for denning, and their behavior is organized entirely around caloric acquisition. Their foraging radius expands dramatically. Their tolerance for risk in pursuit of food increases. Bears that would normally avoid human areas in spring and early summer may enter campgrounds, recreation areas, and even residential zones during hyperphagia if natural food sources are inadequate or have failed. The combination of elevated caloric drive, potentially reduced natural food availability, and expanded movement into human proximate areas creates the conditions under which predatory attacks are most likely to occur, and the seasonal distribution of fatal black bear attacks in the data reflects this concentration. The geographic distribution of fatal black bear attacks also contains information that the conventional narrative has not adequately engaged. The majority of fatal black bear attacks in North America occur not in the populated front country, but in the back country, in remote areas where humans are present in smaller numbers and where the bears involved have less extensive experience with human presence and human defensive behavior. This is counterintuitive to many people who assume that the increased human-bear contact in suburban and peri-urban areas is the primary driver of attack risk. The suburban black bear that raids garbage cans and wanders through residential neighborhoods is a highly visible, high-contact animal that generates enormous numbers of wildlife complaint calls and extensive media coverage. It kills almost nobody. The remote backcountry bear that has never been conditioned to avoid humans, that has never been hazed, that has never experienced the negative consequences of close human contact that drive avoidance learning, is the bear that appears repeatedly in the fatal attack record. The high-contact suburban bear has, in many cases, developed a nuanced and sophisticated understanding of humans as a source of food rewards and potential negative consequences. The remote bear has developed no such understanding. It has simply assessed a human being as a potential prey animal in the same way it might assess a fawn or a moose calf. This does not mean suburban black bears are safe. It means the risk landscape is more complicated than the simple urban versus rural framing suggests, and that the drivers of predatory attack risk are not primarily about the frequency of human-bear contact, but about the character of that contact and the individual bear's history of experience with humans. The Canadian record is particularly instructive on this point because Canada contains large areas of remote black bear habitat where human density is low, where backcountry use has increased substantially over the past 2 decades, and where the institutional infrastructure for managing human-bear conflict is thinner than it is in the heavily trafficked national parks of the American West. The majority of fatal black bear attacks since 2000 in the Herero database have occurred in Canada, disproportionately in remote areas of Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba, and British Columbia, and disproportionately involving lone males in nutritional stress attacking lone individuals or small groups engaged in outdoor work, fishing, or remote camping. The victims of these attacks include hunters, loggers, prospectors, fishermen, and outdoor workers, a demographic that spends extended time in remote areas with minimal defensive infrastructure, that is often alone or in very small groups, and that is less likely to have the behavioral framework for recognizing and responding to predatory black bear behavior because that behavioral framework is not part of the standard safety communication these populations receive. The occupational dimension of black bear attack risk is one of the least discussed aspects of the fatal attack record and one of the most important for understanding where the true risk is concentrated. The image of bear attack victims in public discourse tends to be recreational hikers and campers, which reflects the demographics of the people generating media coverage of wildlife encounters. The actual victims in the fatal attack data include a significant proportion of people doing outdoor work, and the conditions of that work, remote locations, frequent solo operation, extended time in the field, proximity to things that attract bears like fish camps and carcasses, create a risk profile that is substantially elevated relative to the recreational hiker demographic. The response to a predatory black bear attack is the behavioral protocol whose communication gap is perhaps the most consequential in all of North American wildlife safety education. A substantial proportion of people who recreate in black bear territory have received some version of the standard bear safety messaging. Many of them know that grizzly attacks call for playing dead and that black bear attacks call for fighting back. But the delivery and retention of that information are inconsistent, and the specific conditions under which a black bear attack should be classified as predatory rather than defensive are rarely communicated with the clarity and specificity that would make them actionable in an actual encounter. The result is a population of people who have abstract awareness of the distinction without the concrete knowledge needed to apply it under stress. The behavioral signals that identify a predatory black bear approach as distinct from a defensive or exploratory one can be described with reasonable precision. A bear that is approaching slowly, persistently, and directly with its head low, without the huffing, popping, and swatting behavior that characterizes defensive threat displays, is showing a behavioral profile more consistent with predation than with threat assertion. A bear that has been observed following a person or group of people at a distance for an extended period before closing is showing behavior more consistent with stalking prey than with a defensive response to a perceived threat. A bear that approaches a campsite in darkness, quietly and persistently, that is not deterred by noise or the activation of light, is showing behavior more consistent with predation than with opportunistic food seeking. A bear that does not respond to shouting, arm-waving, and direct confrontational behavior by retreating or escalating its own threat display, but instead continues its approach steadily and without deviation, is an animal that the behavioral playbook for defensive encounters does not apply to. And all of these behavioral signatures are specifically associated with bears that subsequently kill people in the fatal attack record. Fighting back is not only the recommended response to predatory black bear attacks, it is the response with the most extensive documented record of success in non-fatal attack outcomes. People who fight back against predatory black bears survive at rates that dramatically exceed the survival rates of people who do not. The physical tools available for fighting back matter. Bear spray, when deployed correctly against an approaching bear at a range of about 30 feet, has an outstanding record of deterring attacks across both grizzly and black bear encounter types. Firearms have been used successfully in numerous predatory attack situations by people who were carrying and could access them under stress. Physical resistance, with any available improvised weapon, rocks, sticks, trekking poles, has successfully caused bears to disengage from predatory attacks in documented incidents. The common thread is active, sustained, determined resistance, as opposed to submission or flight. The flight response is worth specific attention because it is, for most people, the instinctive response to a bear encounter, and the one that the available evidence suggests is most likely to precipitate or accelerate a predatory attack. Bears, like most large predators, have a strongly developed pursuit response to fleeing prey, and a human who runs from a black bear that is in the assessment phase of a predatory sequence, not yet committed to an attack, but watching, following, and evaluating, may trigger the predatory sequence by providing the fleeing prey behavioral cue that confirms the classification of the human as prey. Standing ground, making noise, appearing large and assertive, and maintaining eye contact in a black bear predatory encounter context runs counter to the deepest instincts of most people and requires either extensive prior preparation or the specific kind of fear management training that very few recreational outdoor users have received. The gap between the behavioral response that is most likely to produce a good outcome and the behavioral response that most people will naturally produce is one of the most practically significant and least addressed problems in black bear safety communication. The children and small persons dimension of predatory black bear attacks echoes the mountain lion pattern in ways that are not coincidental. They reflect the same underlying mechanism, a predatory animal's prey recognition system that incorporates size and behavioral confidence as assessment variables. Children and smaller adults are represented in the black bear fatal attack record at rates that reflect this mechanism directly. The incident at Liard River Hot Springs, the fatal attack in Combermere, Ontario in 2013 when 2 young children were killed in their family's backyard, the attack in Tennant Creek in Northern Territory that generated international attention, All of these involve specific victim characteristics that place the victims closer to the size and behavioral profile that a black bear's predatory assessment identifies as manageable prey. The child sleeping in a tent in a backcountry campsite. The child playing at the edge of a yard in a forested rural setting represents a prey opportunity for a predatory black bear in a way that is grimly and specifically biological. This is not a comfortable thing to say. It is true, and it has direct implications for how risk management guidance around black bears in rural and near-rural settings should be communicated to parents, which is very differently from the way it currently is. The tent attack profile is one of the most documented and most disturbing in the fatal black bear record. A significant number of fatal black bear attacks occur when a bear enters a tent at night and attacks a sleeping occupant. These are unambiguously predatory events. A bear approaching a tent is not defending cubs. It is not surprised at close range. It has assessed the tent, detected a human inside it, and made a decision to investigate or attack. The victim in a tent attack is at an extreme disadvantage, disoriented from sleep, in a confined space, potentially tangled in a sleeping bag, with limited access to defensive tools. The outcome in tent attacks is fatal at a rate that substantially exceeds the overall fatality rate for black bear attacks, which is itself not negligible when predatory encounters are isolated from the full universe of encounters, including non-predatory ones. The food storage protocol in backcountry camping is the most important behavioral practice for reducing the probability of this scenario, and its logic is sound. Bears attracted to a campsite by improperly stored food are more likely to investigate sleeping areas than bears that find nothing of interest in the camp. Reducing food attractants reduces the frequency of bear camp contact, but it is important to understand what proper food storage does and does not accomplish in the context of predatory black bear risk. It reduces the probability of an encounter driven by food attraction. It does not reduce the probability of an encounter driven by a bear that has identified the camp's human occupants themselves as a potential prey target. A bear in predatory mode that has been watching a camp and tracking its human occupants is not deterred by a bear canister. The food storage protocol is necessary but not sufficient, and treating it as a complete solution to backcountry black bear risk reflects a misunderstanding of the predatory attack mechanism that the fatal attack data clearly describes. The role of prior human conditioning, or the absence of it, in predatory black bear behavior is worth examining carefully because it has management implications that are not currently reflected in most wildlife management frameworks. Bears that have had negative experiences with humans, that have been hazed, that have been captured and relocated, that have been chased by dogs, or that have been exposed to other aversive conditioning that associates human presence with unpleasant consequences, are substantially less likely to initiate predatory approaches toward humans than bears that have had no such experience or whose experience with humans has been neutral or positive, meaning involving food rewards. This is not a theoretical inference. It is an empirical pattern supported by documented behavior across multiple populations. The practical implication is that the management tools that maintain healthy bear wariness of humans, active hazing programs, aversive conditioning responses to bold bear behavior, liberal hunting regulations that maintain a population of bears that has been selected for wariness of humans through the removal of bold individuals. All of these contribute to predatory attack risk reduction in ways that are measurable and important. The decline in regulated bear hunting in some jurisdictions over the past 30 years, driven by the same conservation sentiment that produced the California mountain lion hunting ban, has produced bear populations in some areas that are larger, less hunted, and in the aggregate less conditioned to avoid humans than the populations that preceded them. This does not mean bear hunting is a simple or costless solution to predatory attack risk. It means that the management of bear populations in ways that maintain their wariness of humans is a legitimate wildlife safety concern that deserves to be explicitly incorporated into management frameworks, rather than treated as a politically inconvenient secondary consideration in the conservation conversation. The hazing and aversive conditioning programs that are most effective at maintaining bear wariness use rubber bullets, cracker shells, bear dogs, and other deterrents to teach individual bears that close contact with humans produces unpleasant outcomes. These programs work. They are documented to reduce repeat conflict incidents with individual bears in multiple studies across multiple jurisdictions. They are also resource-intensive, require trained wildlife officers or licensed contractors, and are not systematically deployed across most of the geographic range where human black bear conflict is a regular occurrence. The gap between what the behavioral science supports as effective at maintaining bear wariness and what is actually being deployed at scale in most jurisdictions represents an ongoing and consequential management deficit. The data from Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks, where bear management is more intensive, better funded, and more consistently applied than almost anywhere else in North America, shows lower predatory attack rates than comparable remote areas with less management infrastructure. This is not entirely attributable to hazing and aversive conditioning programs. The parks have higher visitor density, more wildlife ranges, more infrastructure for visitor safety communication, and bears that have experienced a longer history of intensive management contact. But the behavioral science supports the conclusion that the management effort contributes meaningfully to the outcome, and the contrast between park fatality rates and backcountry fatality rates outside managed areas is a natural experiment in what intensive bear management produces relative to its absence. The communication problem that surrounds black bear risk is structural and will not be solved by a single study or a single policy change. It is rooted in the way wildlife agencies have historically balanced the competing objectives of accurate risk communication, conservation of species that benefit from positive public attitudes, and the management of recreational economies that depend on people feeling safe in wild places. These objectives are not always in conflict, but they are sometimes in conflict, and when they are, the accuracy of risk communication has historically lost to the other two. The result is a public that substantially underestimates the predatory threat that black bears represent in specific contexts, and that therefore lacks the behavioral framework to respond appropriately when they encounter one of the relatively small number of individuals that have entered a predatory behavioral mode. The specific communication gap that is most dangerous is the failure to distinguish, in public safety messaging, between the typical black bear encounter and the predatory black bear encounter. The typical black bear encounter is benign. The bear detects a human, perceives a potential threat, and retreats, or engages in defensive posturing that resolves without physical contact. The guidance for the typical encounter is appropriate. Make noise, appear non-threatening, give the bear an escape route, do not run, back away slowly. This guidance is correct for the typical encounter and wrong for the predatory encounter. Applying the typical encounter guidance to a predatory encounter, which means behaving non-threateningly and giving the bear time and space, amounts to reducing your own defensive behavior at the precise moment when maximum defensive behavior offers the greatest survival advantage. The failure to communicate the distinction clearly, with specific behavioral indicators that allow a person in the field to tell which kind of encounter they are in, is the most consequential gap in North American black bear safety communication. The wilderness safety community, including outdoor educators, wilderness medicine instructors, and backcountry guide associations, has done better work on this distinction than official wildlife agency communications have. but its reach is limited to the communities that actively seek professional outdoor education, which is a small subset of the population that recreates in black bear habitat. The average person visiting a national forest or state park campground or hiking on a popular trail through black bear territory is receiving safety information that is calibrated to the typical encounter and provides no framework for the atypical one. The atypical encounter is rare. When it occurs, the information deficit can be fatal. The documented role of solo travel in predatory black bear attacks mirrors the mountain lion data closely, and for the same reasons. A lone individual moving quietly through terrain, particularly at dawn and dusk, particularly in heavy vegetation where visibility is limited, presents a behavioral profile that is more consistent with the prey profile that a predatory bear might identify as a low-risk target than a group of people moving through the same terrain. The protective effect of group size against predatory large carnivore attacks has been demonstrated across multiple species and multiple geographic contexts. It is not a function of the group's ability to collectively fight back, though that is a real consideration. It is primarily a function of the behavioral signals that a group produces, the noise, the unpredictability, the multiple sensory inputs that are less consistent with the prey behavioral profile that triggers predatory assessment in the first place. A group of 4 people hiking through black bear territory is not simply 4 times safer than a solo hiker. It is likely substantially more than 4 times safer, because the protective effect is not linear but threshold dependent. Groups above a small size cross a threshold of sensory and behavioral complexity that suppresses predatory assessment in a way that single individuals, and even pairs, do not. The night hiking and pre-dawn hiking risk profiles deserve specific attention because they are becoming more common as recreation culture evolves, and because the lighting conditions involved modify the encounter dynamics in ways that are not well communicated. Black bears are not strictly nocturnal, but they do shift toward more nocturnal activity in areas with high human day use, which means that dawn and pre-dawn hours represent a peak period of black bear activity in many popular recreation areas, at the precise time when trail use has recently expanded due to the rise of early start hiking culture in the backcountry community. The combination of higher bear activity, lower human visibility and low light, and the reduced ability of other trail users to provide the protective effect of group presence creates a risk profile in dawn and pre-dawn backcountry that the current safety communication framework does not explicitly address. The weapons question in black bear country deserves honest engagement because it is one on which the wilderness safety community has historically been divided, along lines that owe more to cultural politics than to the empirical evidence on outcomes. Bear spray is extraordinarily effective. The scientific literature on the effectiveness of bear spray in preventing injury during bear encounters consistently shows it outperforms firearms in the field conditions that characterize most encounters. Unexpected, fast-moving, high-stress situations where fine motor control is compromised and the attack is initiated at close range. This is not an argument against carrying firearms in bear country. It is an argument for carrying bear spray regardless of what else you carry, because the evidence clearly supports its effectiveness, and because the conditions under which bear spray fails, the bear that closes from an extremely close distance before spray can be deployed, the wind conditions that defeat the spray cloud, are the same conditions under which most people are also unable to effectively use a firearm. Both tools have a role. The common practice of carrying one or the other, but not both, reflects a preference that is not well supported by the outcome data. Firearms in the hands of people who have trained for bear defense scenarios, who have practiced drawing under stress, who understand shot placement on bears and the mechanical requirements of a firearm powerful enough to stop a bear's charge, do have a documented record of success in predatory bear attack scenarios. The incidents in which backcountry users or outdoor workers have successfully shot bears during predatory attacks are real, documented, and represent an important data point in the risk management picture. The incidents in which people have attempted to use firearms against attacking bears and failed because the firearm was inaccessible, because the person's stress response compromised fine motor function, because the shot was poorly placed on a fast-moving animal, are also real and also instructive. The conclusion from the composite record is not that firearms are ineffective, but that their effectiveness is highly conditional on training, accessibility, and situational variables in a way that bear spray's effectiveness is somewhat less conditional. The trail running community's engagement with black bear predatory attack risk has been even less developed than its engagement with mountain lion risk, which itself is inadequate. Trail runners in black bear territory run with the same risk profile elevation that they exhibit in mountain lion territory, alone, moving fast, at dawn and dusk, in terrain with limited visibility, generating the fleeing prey behavioral cue that pursuit predators are wired to respond to. The trail running community's cultural emphasis on minimalist load carrying means that bear spray, already an uncommon carry among recreational hikers relative to the risk level it addresses, is even less commonly carried by runners who are optimizing for weight and ease of movement. The result is a growing population of users moving through black bear habitat at times and in ways that elevate their predatory attack risk profile, without the defensive tools or behavioral framework that would give them meaningful options if they encountered one of the relatively rare predatory individuals that the attack record documents. The denning period provides a useful bookend to this discussion because it represents the time of year when predatory black bear attack risk is at its minimum, and understanding why illuminates the mechanism from a different angle. Denning bears are not an attack risk. Bears in the process of entering the den, in the early weeks of denning, and in the first weeks after emergence are at energy levels and behavioral states that suppress predatory drive. The peak of predatory attack risk is the hyperphagia period, roughly August through October, across most of the black bear's range. When caloric drive is at maximum, natural food resources may be inadequate, and bears are moving extensively and boldly in pursuit of calories. The seasonal concentration of fatal attacks in this window is one of the clearest signals in the data, and one that translates most directly into actionable risk management. The behavioral vigilance level appropriate for a backcountry trip in September is categorically different from what is appropriate for the same trip in June, and most safety communication frameworks do not explicitly communicate this seasonal gradient. What the fatal attack data reveals, taken together and examined honestly, is not a simple story about dangerous animals threatening human safety in a way that demands a policy of fear or exclusion. Black bears are remarkable animals whose capacity for coexistence with human populations across a vast continental range is a genuine ecological success story and a testament to the species' behavioral flexibility and intelligence. The overwhelming majority of black bear encounters end without incident. The overwhelming majority of individual black bears will never attack a human being. The risk is real. It is specific in its conditions and its profile, and it is substantially different in character from what the conventional narrative about bears communicates. The grizzly bear's fearsome reputation is not wrong. The grizzly is a genuinely dangerous animal in proximity, powerful beyond any easy comparison, assertive and reactive in ways that produce serious injury and death when encounters go wrong. But the grizzly's danger, in most cases, is the danger of a powerful animal conducting a defensive use of force that the human can sometimes survive by understanding its logic. The black bear's danger, in the subset of cases that produce fatalities, is the danger of a predator that has identified you as food. These are not the same threat. They do not call for the same response, and they do not deserve the same cultural weight, which means the cultural weight assigned to each species is backwards relative to the character of the threat each actually poses in the encounter type that matters most. The 63 people killed by black bears in North America since 1900 are not a call for persecution of a species that is important, well-adapted, and deserving of the conservation attention it receives. They are, most of them, the outcomes of predatory encounters by specific individual bears in specific conditions that were identifiable before the fatal encounter occurred, and that a combination of better safety communication, more honest public engagement with the predatory attack profile, and more effective management of bold, habituated individuals could have reduced. The gap between the predatory attack record and the public understanding of black bear risk is where the conversation needs to happen. Not in the comfortable space of statistical reassurance about rarity, which is true as far as it goes, and dangerously incomplete as a complete picture, but in the specific, honest, behaviorally detailed space that the fatal attack data actually describes. The black bear you see at the edge of a meadow in the morning light, standing briefly to assess you before dropping to all fours and fading into the trees, is almost certainly not the black bear described in this script. It is the representative of its species, the animal that has coexisted with humans across the continent through avoidance, flexibility, and behavioral intelligence that has allowed it to persist where other large mammals have not. It deserves your respect, your attention, and your bear spray canister in your hand, rather than at the bottom of your pack. The small number of individual black bears that have entered the predatory behavioral mode, that are approaching slowly and persistently with their head low, that are not deterred by your noise and your arm waving, that have been watching your camp or following your trail for longer than is comfortable to think about, those bears are a different conversation. That conversation has not been had loudly enough or clearly enough. The data has been available for a long time. The framework for understanding it has been available for a long time. The fatal attack record is telling us something specific and important about the character of the threat that black bears pose in specific conditions, and that specific truth is more useful to the people moving through black bear habitat than any amount of statistical reassurance that has historically served the communication preferences of agencies and the comfort preferences of an outdoor community that would rather not change its behavior. Both truths are true simultaneously. Black bears are not a daily threat to human safety across the vast range of their overlap with human populations. And black bears in predatory mode are more committed, more dangerous in their specific intent, and less responsive to the standard behavioral countermeasures than almost anything else a person is likely to encounter in North American wilderness. Both of those truths belong in the conversation. One of them has been largely absent. This is the one that needs to be heard.